So, you guys, kind of a big day. Drum roll, please. Da, 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 da. So, Strategic Discipleship Ministries website went live today. Yay! And so,
that's exciting.
Yeah.
it's exciting for us. It's already had some activity and stuff, so we're very happy. Anyway, it is clearly the content portion of it's kind of like building the airplane while you're flying it. You know, it'll be getting more and more stuff. A little bit meager at the beginning, but that's okay. Do not despise the day of small beginnings, I believe is the scripture that comes to mind. All right, anyway. Okay, so tonight we are going to be, we are on the chapter about context. That's week 4, I believe. Is that correct? Week 4. And so, just by way of introduction for this particular topic, I like this topic. I've been looking forward to this class. I say that every week, but I've really been looking forward to this class, and for a particular reason. First of all, you all know how all this came together and how it was written and all that. But one of the context is you don't see that very often in a discipleship program. You know, most discipleship programs don't talk about context, and so tonight rather, it's my job to try to present the information so that you can see that, hey, this may be kind of an important topic for our discipleship quest. I have found it to be very important to me personally. So if you're following along on the puzzle, we've done purpose, we've done intentionality. Last week we finished up identity, and this week we are starting down we're about the 3 o'clock position with context. Okay? All right, so the first thing to do is to understand why this is a thing. Why is context even a thing? And I'll just introduce it by saying this. We understand everything according to its context. If we didn't have context to fit that which is coming at us in the world, if we didn't have that, we would just be a collection of chaos, you know. But it's kind of like our organizational filing system, you know. Context is how we put everything together and make sense out of the world. Okay? That's why it's very important as a discipleship topic. And here's the thing. Of course, I've never been a dog, so I don't really know, but I don't see a whole lot of evidence that Peanut understands context. The only context Peanut seems to understand is sleep or awake, or food. There you go. Yeah, are you feeding me or not? Everything's about, am I eating or am I about to eat? Or have I just eaten? You know, anyway, so hopefully we're a little bit beyond that. Alan, we are a little bit beyond that, are we not? I mean, we're not just thinking about food constantly. Yeah. Thank you so much. Okay, so then that brings up the topic of our story. This is another higher order skill, and most of us, I mean, I don't know if you ever have even bothered to stop and think about it, but human beings relate to one another and to the world in terms of a story. That's the way Papa wired us. That's the way he put us together. And that's pretty, and if you think about just what's up with that, you know, it's once again, we have no evidence that the animals that are also alive think about themselves in terms of a story to be told and retold, right? But that's what we're doing. Every time we come into one another's presence, we say, how you doing? What we're asking is, what's your story, right? And so, I've said to you before, well, I'll get to it in a minute, but I'll say it to you now. We've talked about before, you know, you've been bought with a price. You've died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. You don't have a life, contrary to public, the public perception. Everybody's talking about their life. You don't have a life, but you do have a story. All right? You have a story and you have a path that you're walking. And it's uniquely yours. And the cool thing is when you line up, I'm getting ahead of myself, but when you line up or align your story with Papa's story, because he's the original storyteller, when you align those two things, then all of a sudden life begins to make sense.
Wouldn't you say that if you know your journey, that it's easier for you to know your story?
Yeah, because they're synonymous. One is they're pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
Right? Your path, in fact, this will be on the slides in just a minute. Your path is your story.
Right.
All right? And if you don't have a context for it, or if you don't have a context that you have understood and brought together in a collective body of thought, you know, if you're just kind of waking up and just, you know, experiencing the world without any kind of thought at all, chances are you're a pretty confused person, wouldn't you think? Okay, so that's why this topic belongs in a discipleship discussion. So our story is our sense of ourself, our communication with others, right? Our understanding of community. You guys right here, you're part of my story. And I'm part of yours. Like it or not. Okay, relationships are the meaning that we attach to events is very, very much bound up with our story. Our daily events and, drum roll, our eternal purpose and destiny. Okay? Those people that you bump into all day long that have no concept of eternal purpose and destiny, then there's no consistent theme for them to put their life into context for. No higher purpose, no transcendent meaning, right? Okay, so it's the only way we know how to think and relate. Try thinking sometimes and not in terms of a story, and I don't think you can do it. I can't do it. Put it that way. All right? So, now, we're not all born with the same context for understanding. You know, we're born in different places, to different parents, with different DNA. Our circumstances are immediately, from the moment of birth, different, and so we're not. We're not all born with the same context. Therefore, we cannot have the same context as we grow and age and mature. Now, you tell me, is it possible for you to create your own context? When I pause like that, that's when you should talk about it. Yeah, I know. It's not a trap question.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Could be wrong.
I was about to say, we can answer, but it doesn't necessarily mean we're right or wrong.
I promise not to embarrass you on camera. Okay. Well, let's say, How about the answer is yes and no? All right? Like most things, it's not purely one way, not purely the other way. You have certain environmental factors that are what they are, right? And they provide a context. My parents were pretty much poor as dirt, you know. We were the working poor, and that was a context that contributed a great deal to my understanding of myself in my growing up. All right. Yeah, I can look at the same circumstances in my brother's lives, and it had even more impact on one in particular. Okay, in terms of how he viewed himself in the world, how early life circumstances drove them to create a new context. Okay, so yes, you inherit certain context, and you learn to interpret certain context, but you also have the prerogative to change your viewpoint of your context as well. You can remember it's the dilemma of the cube, and we're looking at this cone from the top, and it's a circle. We're looking at it from the side, and it's a triangle, right? So we can take that box, rotate it, and we see differently, and that is changing your context. Now, all right. And by the way, I'm pretty sure they're getting a good shot of your back there, Miguel. I'm pretty sure that, in fact, I'm positive that your context develops as you develop, and so you don't have the same context you did when you were 8 years old. Your children won't have the same context that they do right now, right? Okay, all right. So, in As You Like It, Shakespeare wrote his famous line, "All the world's a stage, and men and women are only players," right? And there is a great deal of contextual truth to that. We actually, we think, psychologically, we think of the things that are going on around us. We are players on a stage, right? Now, the context is the backdrop against which we're doing this, right? Wouldn't make any sense at all if we had let's see, I didn't think about this example ahead of time, so I'm just pulling something out of the air. It wouldn't make any sense at all to have a science fiction story against an Old West backdrop, would it? I mean, that would just be confusing. Wouldn't make any sense. So the backdrop, when it matches our story, then things are cool. I mean, there's not as much cognitive dissonance. So, Okay, so the story plot, the plot of our story, the path that we're walking, context ties that to the director's vision. Now, who's the director? Papa's the director, He's directing this whole thing. And when we understand the context of the story he's written, the story we're writing, and they mesh, then the whole thing makes a lot of sense, and we get good reviews in the press. Okay, now, when you were taking quality management classes, did you do the boat exercise? Do you remember that?
I don't know. I won't know until you
describe it.
So many.
Yeah, I know. This was one of my favorites. Okay, so this the boat exercise went like this. You were divided up into teams. The class was divided up into teams, and you couldn't talk to one another. It was a silent exercise. You had a team leader. The team leader was shown a photograph of the end result. And the team was given, I think it was 7 or 8 Lego pieces, And their instruction was create a boat out of these Lego pieces. And that was it. Well, no problem, except it had to precisely match the director's. And so the team leader, who could not instruct the team, their part was they had the information, they had the context, right? The team didn't have the information, but they had the pieces. And so they start assembling it, and they'd hand it to the team leader. Team leader go, hand it back to them. And they say, okay, well, about the first 4 times that happens, no problem, right? But then the frustration starts to mount after you've looked, and how many ways can this stuff go together? But it's got to be precise, you know? I mean, that's the game, to get it precisely. So the metaphor we're talking about here is we are in our discipleship process trying to get it right. You know, we are assembling the puzzle pieces that Papa has given to us. Now, we have information, and we can talk to him, and he certainly talks back to us. But still, we're continuously handing our boat back to him and saying, how close am I? You know? And that's the whole process, is that communication process. And that's context, that vision of the completed disciple, your last 15 minutes, right? That's the context for all of the, when I wake up in the morning, I review my context. My last 15 minutes is I'm going to be this, and this, and that's what I'm going for today, right? Otherwise, you're just like the cowboy, I've told you before, like the cowboy that runs out of the saloon, jumps on his horse, and rode off in all directions. You know? It's just a confusing mess. Okay, so we've talked about how John chapter 13 and verse 3, you remember, it's the story of Jesus washing the disciples' feet, and it made in John 13:3 makes a statement, 3 things, 3 conditions. It says, and Jesus, knowing that the Father had put all things into his hands, knew where he came, that he had come from God, and that he was returning to God. Got up from his place at the table, laid aside his garments, took up a towel, washed the disciples' feet, right? So that right there, if you're looking for it, if you're aware of the context as an issue, you see that right there in John 13:3, we're given the context of why Jesus was able to do what he did, right? Otherwise, why did he do that? Well, how could he do that? He could do that because he had those 3 contextual factors that allowed him to humble himself to do the most menial task available to his culture in that day, right? Washing somebody else's feet. So, Papa has, in like manner, put all things into our hands with respect to our discipleship, to our development, to our growth into mature sons, right? And because we know where we came from, and we know where we're going, we know he's put all things into our hands, and considering those 3 things, it contextually gives us the ability to go through a day and understand how to operate, right? Okay, so now your life story is, how would you characterize it? What if you had to pick one genre for your life story? How would you contextualize it? Is it a comedy? Is it a drama? Is it one series of drama after another? You know, that would be the junior high version. Is it a Western? Is it a space trilogy? I mean, well, it's kind of a rhetorical question, because I think your life story is a write your own mystery novel. All right? You don't know the end, but you do know the end. But you don't know the end, but you do know the end. you know, and you're writing it as you're going along, and you don't know the specific plot twists and turns just yet. You know they're coming, and you're preparing for them, and so you're writing your own mystery as you go along. That's pretty cool, huh?
Yes.
Say amen or oh me. Okay, so now, all right, I'd like for us to go to page 60 in the workbook, and with your permission, I'll read to you the last paragraph there. By the way, when you see purple lettering on the screen, that means it's a direct quote out of the book. Okay. So, last paragraph on page 60 says, anybody need a book? Are you colorblind, Spencer? No, never mind. Sorry. Well, we won't say that. Okay. Okay, so one of the dysfunctional functions of our independent self, perspective, is to ensure that we are the central figure, the star of every scene of this play. What play? The play of our Write Your Own Mystery novel, right? Or mystery theater. So we're not just players, we are the quintessential prima donna. What does quintessential mean? It means you think about the most spoiled actress you've ever heard about, and that's the quintessential prima donna, okay? It's all about them. Okay. Insisting that our whims be satisfied immediately and fully. We believe that everyone else's story should revolve around ours, right? Some do a better job of concealing this underlying assumption, but we all have it to some degree. That is a symptom of the independent self. And if you think about it, you know, it's not difficult to understand Lucifer's rebellion in these terms, right? In these terms of, he was the quintessential star, quite impressed with his own attributes and loveliness. Well, genius, if it's my story, then why shouldn't I be the star of every scene? Really good question. You're starting to get it. You're getting closer to asking the right question. And when we ask Papa the right question, he delights to answer it. A better version of this question would be, if I am on stage in every scene, how do I write my story without always having to be the prima donna star and understanding that it's not just about me? I think we quit preaching and went to meddling, right? Okay, so what do you think about that? First of all, do you understand what the point of the paragraph is? Well, y'all are quiet tonight.
Well, it can't be just about you because you have other actors coming in and being on stage on different scenes.
Okay, how could it? That's true. That's true. How then can a person? How am I going to ask this? I have seen a lot of people that it's all about them, and yet they still have the same circumstance that you just described, right? How can those two things exist at the same time?
Because different actors have a different story. It's still my story, but they have different parts.
Yeah, but a lot of people, unless unless you are willing to say you have your story and it's great, and you have your story and that's fine, and you have your story. Most of the time, we relate to one another as, you're just a piece of my story. No, yeah, you're just a piece of my story, right? What does that tend to do when we do that? What would that be like? How would that play out in a marriage relationship, for example? If
I'm a supporting actor in her love story.
There you go.
that's a very enlightened perspective, Brian. Now, how would it play out if you've got two people occupying a household, and they're both the star of their own story, and you are a piece of mind?
It would look
Don't
like
work out the same
probably the
household.
majority of marriages.
Yeah, that's true. And it would also probably reflect a pretty high divorce rate, wouldn't it?
Yes.
It would indeed. So, one of the challenges of being married is learning how to tell your story together and to merge your stories, right?
Yeah, it's all intertwined.
It's all intertwined. And so in Ephesians 5, when Paul writes that, I'm telling you a mystery about Christ and the church, when he's talking about marriage, right? When he's talking about that, you start to see that, oh my gosh, if I remain an independent self without merging my story with this person to whom I'm married, it's going to get real bad real quick and probably stay that way. Don't you think? Okay. Knock her off there if she bothers you. Okay. Okay. Very good. So, Papa is the original storyteller. And if you think about it, we're created in his image and in his likeness. I think that's one of those characteristics that term relates to. When he says he's created us in his image, means that we operate like he operates. Clearly not completely, but he made us the same as him, so that he tells a story, we understand it. We tell a story and he gets it. Right? So, you've probably heard this. I'm certainly not original with me, but history is his story. Right? So, his story, it's all, now this will blow your mind. I mean, this is really challenging. If you think about this for very long, it'll really challenge you. See, his story, then, how do I merge my story into his story so that they are one story? They're one. That's discipleship. All right? That's why we talk so much about overcoming independent self. Because independent self resists that merging process. Okay? All right, moving on. Where do we get the raw material for our story? Where do we get the ideas for our script? Environment, okay. And what aspects of our environment? Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. That's a big general term, and we're just going to break it down some more. Right?
What denomination you were in. I mean, whether your parents were divorced, not divorced.
How many times your mom called you stupid?
Yes, I mean, so many.
Rich or poor.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. My oldest brother, you don't know him, and he's no longer with us, so I can tell this about him, I guess. That one of the things that bothered him his whole life was that he had a friend whose parents had money, and they were tight friends. My parents didn't. His friend could go and pay a nickel for a hamburger anytime he wanted to, and my brother couldn't. It warped him. I mean, well, it affected him. I shouldn't say it warped him. It affected him dramatically. He swore he would never be without money. Okay? Now, and so he spent a lot of time talking about it. He spent a lot of time thinking about it. He spent a lot of energy making it. Right? So that's one area we get raw material. What about the feedback we give one another? I mean, even when we're not intending to give feedback, you know, when we're just being our silly selves, right? How many of you know we have perfected reading other people, whether we think we can or not, and we pick up on all the signals, all the micro expressions, all the, you know, every, and we store that stuff. And that's why if we aren't very well grounded in what Papa says about us and our, you know, and frankly, you know, I am evaluating your response in terms of my story, and you're evaluating my response in terms of your story. How many of you can see some communication issues developing, right? Okay, tonight we're this is also doubling as a marriage counseling, you know.
Isn't that also iron sharpens iron? Yes.
Okay, how?
Well, if I just have my own little story and I never let anybody else into it, then I never learn anything except what's right in front of me, or what I think, or what I want to do, or so having other people enter into your story and come in and out makes it iron sharpens iron.
How arrogant is it for me to say, well, I just am the way I am and you all just have to adapt?
Is that like saying you gotta love me anyway?
No.
Check. Just thought I'd verify.
No, when I say you got to love me anyway, that's because Scripture tells you to. Yeah, thank you very much for that. Okay, so where were we? Iron sharpening iron. How do we make that dynamic work in a group of covenant believers? How do we make that work without somebody whimpering off into the corner and crying? You know, how do we give that feedback? Yeah. Both how it's received and how it's delivered.
I think it starts like what Susan was saying. I think it starts with us not making it about us first, right? I mean,
I love that.
I know it still starts with me, but it has to. It has to. At some level, you've got to realize. This is my opinion. That if it is iron sharpens iron, it's not about me being right and my rightness and your rightness sharpening each other's rightness. It's not, you know.
Yeah, how does that work?
I don't know, but it's just but in a weird way, it still starts with you, because I think you have to be very I don't know, careful that you're not making it about you.
Yeah.
Boat can't dock into a closed harbor.
Right.
Boat can sit out there all day long.
You're still on the boat exercise here, aren't you?
It's a good idea.
He's thinking of the ports with all those boats sitting.
Yeah, there you go. That's the supply chain. How can we? Okay, very good. So Paul wrote, and I forget where, got a lot of good friends, can't always remember their address. Paul wrote, husbands, love your wives and live with them in an understanding manner. What in the world does that mean?
If they offend you, get over it. Well,
Okay, so say it again more loudly, please.
I mean, you can offend your partner, but not intentionally.
Yeah.
And maybe my wife has offended me once or twice in the past, but I love her so much that I just get over it. Just let it go. I don't sit there and hold it in me, let it fester and make me angry all the time.
Okay,
Try really hard not to be that way.
so may I summarize that by saying keep your accounts short. Keep your offense account short, right?
Don't keep score.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Terry?
Well, it's understanding the person you're with, knowing likes and dislikes, things, knowing when they're hurting, knowing what makes them happier, what makes them secure. It's making sure that you create a safe environment for them, and that's mentally, emotionally, psychologically, and all aspects in between. That's understanding.
Well, can I talk about our conversation this morning without going into detail?
Yes, you can.
Thank you. I think that was permission. What do you think? I'm not sure that was permission.
That's like getting.
I don't really understand that.
Let me just.
You can, but if you mess up,
Okay, you got this much leash. Okay, now without going into detail, let me just say that Susan and I, various aspects of just how we're put together, we are very, very different.
never would guess.
Well, believe it or not, it's true.
I'm the nice one.
Yeah, she is.
Just ask me, I'll tell you, right?
And just this morning, we had a negotiation, and the issue is, and frankly, we didn't begin very well. We didn't begin the conversation very well. You don't know anything about that, I'm sure. No, you'll never fight, right? I didn't know. Were we fighting? Well, pretty much. Well, yeah, that's a given. But okay, so I'm glad to say that we came to the point where after that we recognized what was going on, and even though there really is no answer, she is who she is, I am who I am, and it's not even something we can change about ourselves.
Is that like saying agree to disagree?
Well, yes, but I don't think so.
It was more like learning to live with each other in an understanding manner.
Thank you.
It sounds like there's more acceptance than
Yes.
agree to disagree.
Yes.
Yeah, because agree to disagree means you can go off in your room and I'll go off in mine. But if you're going to occupy the same space, then something's got to give. And so we negotiated, and I think we came up with a solution that we're both happy with. But the point is, until you understand the context of independent self and two independent selves occupying the same space, you're doomed, you know? Even if you manage to stay together over a long history, 50 years, which we're coming up on, you get to the point, unless you're trying to give up independent self, you can't really claim to be very happy most of the time. And you all have seen those couples that they're together, but they're going everywhere. You get what I mean, right? Okay, so.
But it's not just in marriage either. I mean, that's in relationships, just in general.
It is.
I mean, you have to, if you want to be in close relationship with someone, you have to be willing to allow negotiation to happen.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought that up. So it really takes me back to where I'd like to put a practical layer on the discussion and say, we understand how it has to happen, must happen in marriage for it to be something more than just roommates. What about in the context of the church community? What about in the context of a home group? Most of us here go to the same home group. So what about in that context? How do we learn to live together in an understanding manner?
Well, it's each one of us is a part of the body, but we're not the same part. Like the eye don't hear very well, the hand don't see very good, stuff like that. And yet it's all part of the same body. So it's understanding the differences and the gifts and stuff like that, and being able to tie it all together and make it work together.
Or make it teachable. Acceptance.
It's pretty easy to understand how the finger can offend the eye, right? And how many of you know we do that to one another? Just by being just by being an ear, you know, whatever. But it takes something beyond. Now you gotta love me anyway, Lester. It takes something beyond both of us being believers to be able to negotiate that intimacy, doesn't it? Because I know, and you know, a ton of believers who haven't taken a single step toward overcoming their independent self. Right? What is that called? It's called a church split. You know, sorry. Oh, I guess I need to remember I'm being recorded here. Okay, so how do we? Fortunately, I got my editor in the room here. How do we even approach that? How do we live with that reality as a context for our relating together? What are the mechanics of that process? If you just don't ever give it any attention, you don't ever talk about it, you don't ever discuss how are we going to live together in this, are we going to be successful? It's going to be awkward. And generally somebody will pack up their toys and leave, you know. They'll just, and usually they won't say anything, they'll just disappear. Right? No confrontation, will just disappear. Okay, well, those are all good questions to contemplate. Deborah?
Well, I was going to say that, like, in the context of a church, it might look different than obviously it would than in the context of a marriage. But, you know, in a big church setting, I think a lot of times that might happen because there's been zero introspection. So because it is all about me, myself, and I. You know, you hurt my feelings, or I didn't like the way you said that, or I'm just not going to take the time because you would never understand. Those kind of self-talk, right, that you would say sitting there. And I like what Brian was saying, but it's also not just recognizing it. So what is the answer? Like, you can sit here and we can recognize that we would need to listen to each other, but what is the like you said, the mechanism that would get you to that spot? Am I making sense?
Yeah. I mean, here's what we do, and if I'm wrong, you can tell me. What we do is we recognize all these great principles that are the topics of Sunday morning sermon, right? You need to live together. We need to live in understanding with one another. But then you got to take it farther than that. And that's what discipleship is about, you know, converting high ideals into everyday ordeals. How are we going to do that?
And it's to me, it seems, other people might disagree with me, but it seems the more people you have involved in that, the more complicated that answer gets. Even though it's very important for a husband and wife, you're only working
Right. And not only that, but I cannot demand from you that you value overcoming independent self. I can't require that of you, right? You must see the value and make that decision. How many of you know that there are a lot of people, first of all, never even heard of an independent self. Second of all, never saw that it was a valuable thing. In fact, I've been given just the opposite, and just the opposite is reinforced every day when they leave their home and go out into the world, right? The world is telling you, be strong, be independent, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. By golly, you have the right to be treated well, right? And if you don't stand up for yourself, nobody will. And all those kinds of platitudes that are, those soundbite things that sound so good, but when they come between people, they tend to screw things up, right? So part of it, an initial step might even be that we all agree this is a valuable thing, worthy of some sacrifice and some effort on our part, right?
Well, also, isn't it also true that this isn't possible if you don't know who you are? Unless you are secure in who God created you, with your giftings, such as they are, and you understand them to the fullness that you have so far, then if you're not in that place, then you can't. It's too risky. It's too dangerous to let somebody else in.
I agree.
So I'm protecting myself by, making sure that nobody hurts me.
I agree. Good job. Okay, so it occurs to me that somebody watching this might not know what we have talked about from the beginning. And so I'm just going to say very briefly, you know how this information was written and where it came from, as far as I'm concerned. You know, I've explained this to you, that this puzzle piece, these 9 puzzle pieces are something that Papa, I didn't see a vision like you see visions, but he quite clearly put them together. And not only did he put them together, he put them together in this. So you begin on the upper left with your purpose, and then you go to being intentional about that purpose and doing it on purpose with purpose, all right? And then it is no accident that identity comes before context. Just exactly what you just said, Susan. You have to understand who you are, what Papa says about you, says what is true about you, and that has to be established before you can risk to allow yourself to be someone else's context in their story.
Not just that, but it's not even risky. It's actually going out and looking at that point the things you lack.
There you go.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I may have a prophetic bent, but if I wanted healing, I would go to Brian because I know that's what he does. You know what I'm saying? It's like I would value the other things that I don't have, that I'm not strong in. And then there's room for everybody.
It's a picture of the
Body.
body.
It is. All right. Well, anybody else want to contribute to that bunny path, that long bunny path that was so I found very valuable?
It seems like I'm coming at it from a little bit different angle, because I'm still learning what my identity in Christ is. I'm quite willing to get perspective from other people and have, like Susan was saying, if I want, realizing the shortcomings that I had pulling from the group. And meanwhile, I'm learning my identity while I'm learning the identity that Christ has for me.
Yes.
Building an airplane as I'm flying it and drinking from the fire hydrant.
I think that's super cool because I think that's true. I think that's true about all of that. I think that Randy had said something in one of the earlier chapters that said or maybe it was in a different context, that you are saved, you are being saved, and you will be saved, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I think you can look at all of those and say that same thing for purpose. I think till the day we pass from here to kingdom, I think that we'll always be growing that purpose and learning all of that. And same thing with intentionality. You know, you're going to be more intentional and about more specific stuff tomorrow than you were, 2 weeks ago or whatever. Same thing with identity. I mean, all of them. And your context is going to constantly change because we have new stories to add to that context. Right? I mean,
Exactly.
all of us are going to be growing and changing. So I think it's right on track. I mean, I don't think any of us completely know our identity. Don't even know if that's possible to completely know who you are in Christ until
Your last 15.
Your last 15 minutes. Now, yeah, I mean, that seems like a goofy title, but it's starting to become a little more clear all the time, right? Yes, I'm right there with you. I totally agree with you. And I understand what you're expressing. Now, add this thought to it. How much better off in that pursuit are you if you understand that you're in that race, If you understand that that's your OODA loop, right? Yeah. If you understand this is my path, if you understand that I'm being perfected, first of all, you're gonna quit trying to white knuckle it and make it all happen right now, right? Hopefully you are.
It won't take very long.
Yeah.
If you are, it won't take very long.
Yeah, but if you don't have the contextual framework for understanding, your failures seem so much bigger. But if you understand, you know what? I'm not supposed to be. Am I Texan or what? I am not supposed to be complete until 15 minutes before I'm dead. And then I may have 14 minutes or so to play with. Right? Right? So I don't use that as an excuse to ignore issues and growth issues in my life, but I do understand it as context for not beating myself up. How many of you know believers that are not eaten up with sin so much as they are eaten up with the concept that they are a sinner? They're under that burden, and it's all they can see and all that. And yet, anyway, well, I won't go any farther down that. And AA actually, I mean, it's not right because it's AA. AA got it right because it's Bible. It's kind of like those businesses that don't set out to be Christian, but they stumble on Christian principles and prosper, right? Because that's the way Papa put it all together. Okay, well, let's talk about some more context. All right, so this is my and this was a flash of what do you call that? Not brilliance, but a flash of revelation. When I was putting this all together this week, I said, you know what? We have no life, but we do have a story. So our story, his life, right? And if we can hold that as a context for the way we just approach things in general, it's our story, but it's his life. All right, moving on. All right, we got to talk about assumptions, because assumptions, oh my gosh, are so powerful. All right? What do I mean by an assumption? That's a question. What do I mean by assumption? What does assumptions mean? You don't know what I mean by assumptions. What does assumptions mean? Okay, let's get that out of the way. Ass out of you and me. All right, we said it now, we can. Okay, so assumption. What is an assumption?
Preconceived notion without any prior backing?
Well, maybe you have backing, but it is a settled notion that's running in the background of your thinking, right? They are the things that you have previously settled as true. Okay? Do you know all of your assumptions?
There's no way you can.
Oh yeah, I think you can. Well, I don't know if you can know all of them.
It's too broad for everybody to bring all their assumptions into one time, one feeling.
Well, I'm going to give you this challenge.
Okay.
Know as many of your assumptions as you possibly can uncover. And if that sounds like work to you, yes it is.
I'll help you through it.
You're in trouble now.
Yeah. You got, okay, why do we even do that? Why should we seek to uncover that mental programming that's running in the background that has been being developed since you were in the womb? You know? And your mom was talking to people and saying, I don't want this baby. I don't want this baby. How are you going to turn out? Right? And that's going to be an assumption that's constantly playing in your background. And it's going to filter the way you see the world and the way people interact with you. If you don't understand what your assumptions are, this is not just psychology, this is discipleship. If you don't understand what your assumptions are, or at least some significant portion of them, then you believe things, you react to things, stuff comes out of you and you go, where did that come from? You've never had that experience probably, right?
Right.
Well, I have. Okay? So, assumptions serve a very useful purpose. Once again, it's the way you are wired. Just think about it. If you had to start over on every topic and think through it from the beginning to arrive at a decision point, could you get anything done ever? Could you even be in a relationship with a person? I don't think you could. So, assumptions are not bad, they are a thing, but you got to know what they are.
I have questions.
Yes.
So, growing up in the church, I was always told I was a sinner. And so, that was my assumption. I'm a sinner. When it was later on, when I found out that no, he died on the cross for my sins, he took away my sins. So, that changed. But is that what you're talking about, assumptions? Like,
It's exactly. It's in the church. It's one that's very prevalent, And there's so many sermons directed at don't be a sinner. When if you think about it, if God was concerned with your sin, if he was sitting in the heavens, if you were breaking his heart, as I've been told so many times in so many sermons, and he's sitting there wringing his hands and crying over the fact that I'm a sinner, first of all, with 8 billion people in the world, or however many billion we have, he wouldn't have time to do anything else. He'd be a yeah. And second of all, for that to be the case, he would have to acknowledge that somehow Jesus' sacrifice was not enough.
Yeah, and the opposite would be, there is therefore condemnation to
Yes.
those.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not the case.
So why do we even do that?
Yeah.
Why do we do that? Why do we do it to each other?
assumptions?
No, the center assumption.
Oh.
You know, that
Yes, yes.
anyway, and not only that, and this is not, you know, this is Bible. This is, I'm not making this up. Not only are our sins paid for, but the sins of the whole world. The whole world. That's Bible. If you don't believe me, go look it up. You know? And so, anyway, back to your point. That is an example of an assumption playing in my mental background. That in the way, how does that even express? I can never be good enough. I always have to perform. And yet I'm a disappointment. And yet, you know, in all of these things, it's just the dominoes fall. What does that do to your relationships?
Oh, it tears them apart.
It does tear them apart because you can't be a whole person, and therefore there's nothing, you can't be relatable. I mean, anyway, okay. So, the role of assumptions is that it helps us bypass conscious decision makings. We are able to make timely decisions because we have all these assumptions stored. Once again, they're not good or bad, but we have to know what they are. Some of them are very bad, and some of us have been accumulating them for a very long time. All right? Okay, so comment on this. This is purple text, so it's right out of the book. Autopilot bypass mode. You know anybody that lives on autopilot? Path of least resistance, you know, is a strategy, and believe it or not, it is an actual strategy. It's a strategy. Okay, well, they would recognize it as such, is a strategy of those whose preferred method of aiming is to shoot from the hip. And those who don't want to be bothered by the business of living so that they may enjoy the entertainment of living. What does that mean to you?
Instead of putting in the work, they just coast. Yeah.
Lazy or me or, yeah.
Well, so if we're on the road of discipleship, then the business of living has goals, it has functions, the things we discuss, how do we relate to each other, the hard work we have to do. It's the business of living as Christ would have us live, versus eat, drink, and be merry, and que sera.
Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Problem is, we don't die. We get there and we don't die. Okay. Yes, Terry, thank you.
I think it goes back to the, what was it? It was on the last slide. Trying to see exactly what phrase to use. Prima donna.
Prima donna.
It could be considered laziness, but I would also think it comes from a place of, especially the entertainment really brought this to light of just, this is my life to live, this is my story, all of you are here to entertain me, I don't have to work, I don't have to do anything, I don't have to put in any business of living, right? I'm just here to dance, monkeys, dance for me.
There you go. You got it.
And I'll float wherever I see fit, and over here's comfortable, and now I'll watch this show, and then I'll come over here and watch this show.
How many of you can see? I know you can see because I know you, but I'm just going to state it. Discipleship, it shall not be so with you, brethren. You know, for all of the platitudes and truths and soundbite Christianity that comes out of our mouth, discipleship ultimately is hard work. And it is ultimately operating against your natural self. And we talked about this last week or the week before. Papa designed it that way. He did it on purpose. So it's his genius program, because you can't just throw yourself in the river of life and float to the end and expect to be transformed into the image of Christ. You cannot do it. It won't work. Or you're a better man than me if you can make it happen. Okay. How many of you know people that this is their whole orientation to life is entertainment? What is my next event that's going to entertain me? I'll tolerate whatever moments I have to between now and my next entertainment, but I'm going to get there because that's the most important thing, right? Okay, moving on. All right, let's talk about what a confirmation bias is. Now, I'm not trying to get terribly psychological, but you got to know that this principle operates in you. And it operates in me. It's there. It's the way we're wired. We see best what we expect to see. What agrees with our assumptions. We see poorly or not at all what we do not expect and what does not agree with our assumptions. Anybody that ever spent any time on Facebook or listening to news, I guess these days, knows that one of the most overused words in the English language is fact. It's a fact. There are very, very few facts in the world, and well, I won't tell you there are very few. There are a whole lot less than are claimed. I'll put it that way. Most things that parade as fact are, in fact, your confirmation bias. It's something that agrees with the way you see things. All right? Now, if you're unaware that that's what's going on, oh my gosh, you're going to dig in and you're going to be right. How does that relate to your discipleship? Okay, it is a fact. It's the way we're wired. Now, accepting that fact as context for life as we know it, how do we live with our confirmation bias? Remember, this is graduate school. This is discipleship graduate school. This is not Christianity 101. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
I was just saying, the only way I see to get past our bias would be to run it through the filter, the Word. Unless it's what you see the Father doing and what you hear the Father saying, probably wrong.
Well, I hear that, and then I see the circumstance where two groups of people look at the same scripture and come to a completely different conclusion. How do you account for that?
Probably they don't have the correct context of what works.
They both think they do.
Like I'm not trying to overuse the word, but it depends on what the context is too. Because the word is alive and it's dynamic. So what might mean, what might be, I might filter it through the word and receive, even from Papa, revelation.
Yes, thank you. That's a good word.
That is different than yours, but it's still a fact for me. But just because it's a fact for me does not mean that that's a fact for you.
I think that, yes, and how can we that is such a grown-up thing to say, and it's such a grown-up attitude to have. And when I say grown-up, I'm talking about mature son of God, mature son of God thing to say. That Papa could actually say something different to you than he says to me, and they're both correct. All right? We talked about the idea of paradox. A paradox, how two seemingly conflicting things yet equally true. How do you hold those things in your brain at the same time without going crazy or running screaming into the night, First of all, you have to understand that such things exist.
And I do think that there's time not to, I want to address what Spencer was saying too, because there are times that somebody would be wrong, but those would be on the foundational truths, not so much on what we're talking about. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I can-
Like if somebody, I'm not saying that there's a truth other than Jesus crucified.
Well, and that's,
There's not another truth. That's a fact, and it's the foundation of our belief in Christ, right? But when you start talking about revelations of a word, like I think the Bible calls them doubtful disputations. You know, they're what makes me think that what I have learned and interpreted in the scripture is any better than any one of them.
yeah,
So that's where I was going with that.
yeah.
Not to make it belittle. I mean, to diminish what he was saying at all when it comes to foundational stuff.
There's this. Yes, go ahead, Miguel.
Beginning to understand it as I go through this, that the words "my assumptions" come into play. It has nothing to do with the heavenly. It's always my assumption is usually what we expect to see, is usually what we expect to see according to how, or at least me, I'm going to talk about me, my experience. I didn't say my life.
Now you can say your story. You have permission to do that.
Right, so I'm going to change the we. I'm going to say I see best what I expect to see, what agrees with my assumption, according to my earthly experiences. So poorly, or not at all, is what happens when you don't delve deeper into what God wants of you. Instead, enjoy the entertainment of living because this is what I want of me. So instead of that, replace it with, okay, what do you want of me, Lord, and what is it that I have to work for? Because obviously now I'm beginning graduate school, right? So I'm beginning to understand that the hard work is necessary, right? So if there's no work necessary, then I'm obviously entertaining myself. So that's
A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and that's a proverb. Anyway, okay. So good. How many of you can see that the first step is understanding that this is in operation? You have to know that you have a confirmation bias. And that doesn't make you wrong or bad. It makes you wired the way Papa wired you. Now, if I'm going to relate to you in an understanding manner, I'm going to have to understand that I have a confirmation bias, and I'm going to have to understand that you have a confirmation bias, and then we're going to have to seek common revelation and figure out how to do this life together, right? Otherwise, we'll just write each other off and say, that person, they're too much work. All right? Okay. By the way, before I leave this, I'm going to say this has been scientifically established to be a true thing, psychologically. But guess who cannot see this principle in operation very well? Scientists. Scientists don't see this in operation very well. And they still run experiments that they claim are unbiased, and yet when they start interpreting the results, they interpret the results according to what they expected to see. Right? Yeah, that's...
It's become a religion.
It has. It has. Okay. So how could a confirmation bias either work for us or against us in our discipleship quest? How could it work? Let's just talk about how it could work for us. We know how it could work against us. It blinds us to new information. Okay? It blinds us. It literally blinds you. Literally, in this case, sometimes is literally after all. I mean, there have been experimental cases where people couldn't even see something that disagreed with their, okay? But figuratively, then if it's not literally, but figuratively, how could a confirmation bias, unrecognized, work against our discipleship?
I think you just witnessed how one can work against. I realize that I have an assumption. Everything, it's always very black or white, right or wrong in my head. And
That's your prophetic gift at work.
yes.
Yeah.
But if you use it in like the fleshly manner, it's not necessarily right or wrong, as Mom was just saying. There's some people have a different understanding or a different revelation that, you know, Papa would contradict himself, but he's definitely going to give, you know, possibly two different answers for two different people that are in two different areas in life, or maturity levels, or whatever you want to call it. So it's not always black and white. It's not always right or wrong. Apparently, there is a mixture in there.
There are certain things that are fact. Jesus was the Son of God. He did die for our sins. He did shed his blood on the cross and presented it on the altar as atonement for our sins. Those things, absolute fact.
And he raised from the dead.
And then he rose from the dead. Yes, of course. And he's coming back. Yeah, and all the and our chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. I know all that. Okay, yes, but how many of you know that the human tendency is to gravitate toward the polar ends of important questions? You know, we got to go to the extremes on the other end, you know? And the truth is often not there. It often is somewhere in the gray middle ground. So when we are talking about our discipleship, we need to be able to recognize that and then be able to negotiate life with our brothers and sisters so that we can maintain union, right? Okay. I think we just answered it. This is an important aspect of this. If you're coming from a place where your assumptions and your confirmation bias have their origins in pain or abuse, how would that affect things? You think it might skew it a little bit?
Your discipleship?
Yes.
Yeah.
How would it skew your discipleship?
Well,
Just depends on what it's rooted in.
I think emotional pain and abuse cause certain assumptions about the world and about how we interact with people, about how we can trust other people, things similar to that you don't fully realize as the emotional pain or abuse is happening is being solidified until multiple years down the line you realize, I don't trust anybody. Why don't I trust anybody? Oh, well, it's because of this assumption I made very long ago that I can't trust anybody, you know?
Okay, so I got to look at the camera and say, this is my grandson. I'm really proud of him. Okay. That was a great answer, Sutton. And until you see that, you have no chance of overcoming it.
well, you can't overcome self, period, if you can't get through your bias on abuse, right? Because you can't identify your purpose. What would you be intentional about? You know, what you definitely don't have your identity.
That's your default that you'll fall back to.
Thank you.
So.
An emotional pain and abuse is designed by fear. So fear then directs our assumptions because we're guided by that instead of being guided by. And it's amazing, this cascading thing, because that all goes back to forgiveness. That all goes back to finding peace about what happened and moving on from there at a more mature level of faith.
Yes, and you said it. Cascading is a great word. I was about to say dominoes falling. It's the same thing, you know. And until we start to dissect this stuff, and that's hard work. That's hard work. Until you start trying to figure out, why do I dislike people that look like him automatically? You know, why do I completely shut down when I get in the presence of someone who's loud and boisterous? I mean, that's just, you know, you understand what I'm saying as an example. You know people that do stuff like that, right? It's like they automatically respond because of this operating in the background. That is a discipleship killer. It's a growth killer because it forms a cap, a ceiling past which you cannot get. We said it this way in the workbook. You are chained to the past. You are chained to that person. You know, there was the way the Romans, one of the Romans had a lot of creative ways to kill people, you know, to punish people and kill them. Crucifixion being only one. There was another way. If you committed a homicide, they would chain or tie or something, attach that body to your back. And as that body putrefied, you had to go through life with that putrefying body hanging on your back. As you can imagine, it ultimately kills you, right? The bacterial, you know, just the whole, if you don't go nuts, crazy first. But that's what we do. The dead man, that dead man, we've chained it to our back and we refuse to cut it loose, or we can't cut it loose. Not always refusing. Sometimes we just haven't been able to work through it. And so that's part of discipleship, is cutting those chains, getting rid of that. And that way you can grow on, get on with life and grow. Anyway, I know. I got a few more minutes.
Is somebody backing up?
Back it up, back it up.
I backed in so I could just pull straight out.
Okay, so, all right, then I'm gonna go quickly and, all right, this is in purple, so it's a direct quote, right? The value of examining our assumptions in discipleship is that our behavior and attitudes are often herded in predetermined directions. Okay? By the assumptions running in the background of our mental programming. Buried assumptions and filters, often in the form of a negative vow. I will never trust another woman. Nobody will ever get to me ever again. Nobody can tell me what to do. Those kinds of negative vows. I mean, you know, words have power, right? Okay. Where to stop? Often in the form of negative vows, keeps us from experiencing fresh revelation. Sometimes Papa says, walk in the light you got, I'll give you more. You know, I've given you light there, walk in it. And impede growth because the new information from the Holy Spirit does not match what we have already accepted as the way church is done. I mean, you know, every one of us has an idea about the way church is done. Right? And when new information comes in, and I recognize this. You remember Roaring Like a Lion several years ago? I'm not commenting on yes or no. I'm just saying that, you know, that became a thing. And it didn't match the way church is done in a lot of people, right? So how do you justify these people over here that are believers, that are claiming this is an operation of the Spirit, and these over here say that's not the way church is done? You know, I don't have the answer for that. I mean, not that particular issue, but that's an example of how we sometimes we can't get past where we are because of what's going on in here. All right.
Well, some people think the church is the building, and actually the church are the people that gather.
Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, did I say that out loud? I didn't mean it. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to run through this slide. No, I'm not going to run through this slide. You can look at this one yourself, and why assumptions are part of us, why Papa even gave them to us, and then if you want to discuss it more next week, we can. But I would like to do a couple of these examples of what are you talking about, Randy, when you're talking about assumptions operating in the background. You know, what does that even mean? Well, so we have this list, and Terry's been through this list before, and so has Brendan Allen, because when we were doing the class, I gave you the assumptions checklist, remember? Well, this is the same. The idea of this is if you answer these questions, they sort of uncover some of these assumptions that you got going on in here. For example, do you assume or not that God is active in the world and in the experience of individual believers? Do you assume that or not? You know, I'm not asking for an answer, but you can see, well, yeah, we're all going to go, sure, yes, absolutely, you know. But then the next question would be, how does that affect my behavior? You know, because it's one thing, remember we talked about notional beliefs and motivational beliefs. Notional beliefs are those we hold in our brain as we think we believe it, but it doesn't ever affect our behavior. That's a motivational belief. Okay, so is God active in the world? Is there a grand plan? Does God have a plan directing the history in the church? Does it affect you? You'd be surprised how many believers think that God created the earth and then just let it run, walked away. Right? Okay, so what are the implications of the dynamic interaction of God's program and your experience? Is there any interaction? Does God have a program? If He does, how does it affect me? Is my life my life? Okay, so do you see how that kind of, the answer to that question can totally affect the way that you conduct your discipleship? You know? The reason for existence and meaning knowable. Can you even know it? Can you know it? A lot of believers don't think you can even know it. What do you assume to be the meaning of all life in general, and your life in particular? Your life in quotes. You know? Okay, so you've got all these things. You've got all these questions. But this, if you answer these questions, and you really look at them honestly and say, how do I, what is running around back there? You know, some of these things are, let me give you another example. Okay, we've talked about this. We talked about our first week, a cosmology for how what happened in eternity past and what happened in eternity future and what happened before the foundation of the world, you know. So, from where did your spirit being originate? Most people in the church would say, yes, I'm a spirit being, or I have a spirit in me, right? Okay. Well, where did it come from? And where is home? And why would you even connect to home as being the eternal realm if you didn't originate there? You see what I'm saying? Okay. What are the implications of your assumption? Do we simultaneously exist in two dimensions? Are we in time, space, matter, and the eternal at the same time? If not, then it makes perfect sense to live your life for your life's sake, right? Life for its own sake, right here. Whatever happens here. Okay, well, you get it. Those are some really beefy examples of things that I know I'm going to meddle here now, but it's a pretty good idea to turn off the television and work your way through sometimes, you know, because until you work your way through some of these questions, you have assumptions running around, clanging around back there that you don't even know, because somebody said it in the past. You grew up in a church that taught this, you know. Conversation over coffee 15 years ago, you know, just, you know what I'm saying. All right. How you doing? You all right? I know we're, okay, so we're out of time, and we will pick it up next time with 5 contextual elements. Now this, I'm going to warn you, you know, this is graduate school again. This is not discipleship 101. So when you read about the 5 contextual elements, you'll understand, hopefully, well, you'll read about it and you'll understand it, and we'll get it. Good job.